What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
After the launch of the flagship Audi Q5 I in 2005, Q7 Audi finally convinced that crossovers are the future and began to gain momentum. The next step was the release of the compact crossover Q5. The technical base for it was almost ready. Platform MLB, on which were based sedans A4 and A5, already offered all-wheel drive and power units. It remained only to strengthen suspensions and to work out a body. Actually, by 2008, the development was completed and the Q5 was on the assembly line. In Russia, sales started in 2009 and reached a decent level. Audi's crossover eventually became the most popular in the class with annual sales volumes of 3,000 to 5,000 copies. Good demand even prompted the Germans to conditionally localize the model. Until 2015, the Q5 was assembled by the large unit method in Kaluga. The price was competitive. Initially, for the base version of the car was asked 1.8 million rubles and the top version without options was 2.3 million rubles. In 2012, the model received a restyling, which brought new motors, but almost did not affect the appearance. Price tags by that time have not yet begun to grow, so that the crossover could be bought for the same 1.7 to 2.2 million rubles. But since 2014, the cost crept up, and by 2017, when the Q5 changed generation, the price list already started at 2.5 million. And ended at 3.4 million rubles. Such high popularity for the class also influenced the formation of an extensive secondary market. At the time of writing the material, there were more than 1,000 Audi Q5 for sale on Avito. And the distribution between restyling and pre-restyling here is almost equal, 500 offers. Let's have a look whether restyling will please and whether it is expensive to keep this crossover with premium features. The first generation of Q5 is not too status car, but it is still quite expensive, so they are well taken care of, and the bodies of most cars have almost no visible defects. Paintwork here is rather thin and fragile, but galvanization in places of shallow chips can hold for several months. However, if you do not take care of treatment, rust appears from the inside and the paint can come off in large pieces. Provided that the car has not been in an accident, problems even at the age of more than 10 years are usually superficial. The most popular diseases for the Q5 are large chips on the edges of the arches, a peeling sill in the area behind the front wheels, flaking paint on the lower edges of the doors, especially in the corners of the rear doors, as well as scuffs and chips at the joints of the fenders with the bumpers. Doors in general should be inspected carefully. Corrosion sometimes hides under the seals and the frames of side windows can fade. Hood and trunk lid here are aluminum, which saves them from typical rust pockets, but does not mean invulnerability. By the way, rusty chips on the hood can hint at a frontal accident with replacement of the part with a cheaper steel one. In the cavities of the arches, the situation may be different. Well-groomed copies are surface corrosion under the fenders in the wet zone, as well as in the seams and under the seam sealant, and ungroomed, large pockets of rust. But it is very rare to reach outright rot, and practically any unbeaten car can be saved. However, good liquidity of Q5 on the secondary market and relative availability of spare parts make you check every variant thoroughly. With spare parts, the situation is fairly typical. The price tags of original parts are high or very high, but the availability of a range of non-original parts usually solves basic problems. Something is still expensive. For example, a non-original aluminum hood can be bought for 100 to 130,000 instead of 150 to 200 or more. For the original, and even a steel one will cost 80 to 100. But front fenders, albeit Chinese, are available for 8 to 15,000 instead of 50 to 70. The front bumper can also be bought a little cheaper. The restyling original has a six-figure price tag, and rare analogs start at 70,000. And pre-restyling Q5 bumper is composite with separate right and left parts. Each also costs 50 to 70,000 for the original and 35. 40 for the analog, but you can find a very cheap Chinese version for less than 10,000, though without guarantees of its quality. But there are no big problems with the windshield. Let the firm pulls on 100 and more thousand. There are analogs from 6 to 20,000. And even headlights are relatively inexpensive. Halogen will cost 50 to 60,000 for the original and 25 to 50 for analogs. Firm xenon is already 100,000 against 35 to 60 for non-original. And adaptive optics will be still 20 to 30% more expensive. The prices themselves are quite decent, but taking into account the high residual value of cars, the repair still pays for itself. Besides, much can be found at Russian dismantling shops. The popularity of the model contributes to this. Compared to the A4 and A5, the Q5's suspensions have been strengthened and improved, but fundamentally the front and rear multi-lever arms remain the same. Complexity of a design pays itself off by controllability and comfort, but requires attention and sometimes money. The assortment of non-original parts here also allows to save a lot, but the main thing is not to get carried away in order not to lose the flavor of premium in driving. For example, front levers with Audi logo will cost 10 to 15,000 per piece, and non-original costs from 1.5 to 8,000. If their ball bearings are alive, you can do without repressing the silent blocks. The original ones cost 3,000 and analogs from 200 rubles, but you remember the danger of unnecessary savings, don't you? Front lower levers are more expensive. In the original version, the front will cost 20 to 30,000 and the rear in 30 to 40,000. But substitutes for both in the assembly are available for 3 to 15,000. Separately, the hydraulic support of the rear lever will cost 7 to 10,000 for the original and from 1,000 for the analog. Stabilizer struts are cheap. Instead of firm for 6,000 you can choose a non-original from 600 rubles. Shock absorbers are also offered in the range from 2 to 12,000 at the cost of the original of 30 to 40 per piece. Hub bearings both in front and behind are changed with the cage separately from the hub and are also available for 2 to 10,000 instead of 20 to 30. The rear suspension is similar in the ratio of prices of the original and analogs. The upper rear lever can be bought for 2 to 10,000 instead of 15 to 20,000, but the front lever has no analogs and costs 30 to 50,000, but for it replacement silent blocks are available. The lower link in front costs 5 to 8,000 even for the original, and analogs start at 2,000. Branded shock absorbers without electronic control cost 16 to 20,000 per piece. Non-original for the same money you can buy a pair. But the controlled shock absorbers are already 80 to 100,000 for the original and 25 to 80,000 for substitutes. In general, earthly orders of prices should not lull your attention. There are a lot of details here, and reassembly can cost a lot. For example, a complete set of front suspension arms from a large aftermarket manufacturer costs 110 to 130,000 rubles. Brake performance depends on the version of the car, and quite noticeably. Basic front mechanisms are single piston with a floating bracket and discs for 345 mm. The next level, 4-piston monoblocks with discs for 320 or 345 mm, and on square 5 2-piston floating mechanisms are used, but with discs with a diameter of 380 mm. At the rear, the design is always simple single piston, only the size of ventilated discs differs, from 300 to 330 mm. In general, if you do not look at the prices of the original, almost for all variants of brakes consumables can be bought inexpensively. From 2 to 4 to 12 to 15,000. Except that for charged versions the assortment of non-original is narrower and prices are higher. For example, front discs on 380 mm or rear discs on 330 mm cannot be bought for 2 to 4,000. Such discs will cost at least 8 to 10,000. But by the measures of class even it is not big money. And here it is possible to pay more attention to work of electromechanical handbrake, 50 to 60,000 for each of 2 control blocks. On a back axis is a lot, and there are no substitutes for them. The Q5 has electric power steering mounted on a rack, and it is also worth checking carefully. The electric motor is not supplied separately, and the price of the original complete rack is phantasmagoric, from 350 to 600,000. The restored one will cost 150 to 200,000. At the same time the rack in age can suffer from leakage. Water getting inside through seals breaks the work, and the price of such dampness sometimes reaches 6-figure sums. Q5 buyers did not have to pay extra for all-wheel drive. Absolutely all cars were equipped with it. Here the asymmetrical differential torsion is applied, distributing the moment in proportion 40:60 in favor of rear wheels. Actually, they rarely remember about it. Reliability does not cause complaints. It is capable to pass 250 to 300 and more thousand kilometers. At purchase it is possible to examine drives, as well as gearboxes for dryness and to study the history of service, sometimes owners. Do not bother to change oil until the last. Q5 had quite a lot of gearboxes. As a basic variant the mechanics on 6 stages was offered, but almost nobody wanted to switch gears manually on a new Audi, so on the secondary market such cars are found literally in single copies. There are no problems with reliability of the automatic transmission. It is necessary only to take into account the cost of a good set of clutch and 2-mass flywheel, which sooner or later will have to be changed. The alternative to mechanics till 2011 was a 7-speed robot S-tronic, simply speaking, DSG with index DL501. This is a version with clutches in an oil bath, which was supposed to digest quite powerful motors and torque up to 500 Nm. But in the first years, the robot caused more suffering than pleasure. Problems with bearings, mechatronic, clutches and some other units led to replacement of complete boxes under warranty. Besides, repair then was mastered worse than now and was expensive. The situation was aggravated by infrequent oil change according to the regulations, which led to contamination and increase in operating temperature. However, if you change the oil once in 40 to 50,000 kilometers and monitor the cleanliness of at least the standard oil heat exchanger, the life of the box can be significantly extended and its repair is now well mastered and costs much cheaper than before, when everything was replaced as a whole assembly. In addition, the box is well diagnosed, which will help to assess the condition and the need for investment even before purchase and haggle if necessary. However, in those years, the problems with complaints about DSG were solved radically. They simply replaced it with an automatic 8 HP 55 from ZF, and so hastily that they did not even wait for the restyling. This box really turned out to be stronger in the first years, and if it is well maintained in the following years. The automatic machine is sensitive to oil purity, which should be changed here every 50,000 kilometers and in case of aggressive driving, even a little more often. And in repair it can be even more expensive than not completely killed robot. Actually, to robots Germans in the end cautiously returned. On late Q5 there appeared DSG with index DL382. It also has 7 gears and clutches in an oil bath, but there are differences in internal device. In terms of reliability, it is somewhat inferior to DL501, but taking into account the small age and maintainability can also be considered a good option for purchase, subject to diagnostics, of course. We told in detail about it and about its predecessor in technical material about Audi A6 and if the difficulties with gearboxes have leveled out over time. Certain difficulties with motors in Q5 remain relevant even now. The vast majority of cars are equipped with 2-liter gasoline engines. They belong to the EA888 family, but before the restyling they are Gen 2 motors and after, Gen 3, and the differences between them are quite significant. The early version has a lot of problems: unsuccessful piston group, provoking oil consumption, unstable life of timing and balancer shafts, crankcase ventilation system failures and so on. After restyling, most of the problems have been solved or minimized. Timing and balance shaft's life has increased, piston group has become better, ECG works more stable. In general, the risks have become much less. More details about these motors and their generations can be read in the separate material The Alternative to the 2-liter before. The restyling was the atmospheric 3.2 FSI. It may seem like it should be better, but in fact the potential expensive hassle with it is no less. The motor, belonging to the EA837 family, has an aluminized block, which is prone to scoring, as well as an extremely complex and not the most reliable timing with 4 chains and located on the rear side. However, the 3-liter TFSI, which appeared after restyling, belongs to the same family and has the same problems with scoring. VKG, catalytic converters and other, to which were added rare failures of compressor supercharger. On top of that, all V6 motors are rated at over 250 horsepower, so the transportation tax is worth putting on the list of potential costs, too. Fortunately, for those who don't want to understand the intricacies of refining gasoline motors, there is an alternative in the form of a diesel. The most popular and reliable option is the 2-liter engines of the EA189 family. Potential costs here are usually limited to classic for diesel repairs of fuel equipment and supercharger and resource at good service. Is stable for 200 to 250,000 kilometers. 3-liter diesels of EA897 family are also quite good, but more complicated and expensive in service. Given that the late gasoline motors are spared from a large part of the problems, the choice of a fresh Q5 for $2 and a bit million comes down to two options, a 2-liter gasoline or a diesel. The diesel should probably be the most trouble-free in the long term. You only need to look for a well-groomed restyled car from the first owner with a mileage of about 100,000 kilometers approximately. And if Autoteca will confirm the mileage and accident-free history and diagnostics, the declared flawless condition, then 2-2 and $5 million at the present time will be an acceptable price for a comfortable car for the next 2 to 3 years, and even more. Well, and if diesel troubles frighten you more gasoline, you can look for restyling 2-liter car with a gasoline engine and mileage up to 100,000 kilometers. The main task with it will be good maintenance and competent choice of oil. In conclusion, the Audi Q5 I presents a compelling option for those considering a luxury SUV at a price point of $2 million. While it may no longer be the intimidating box it once was, its performance and features still hold significant appeal. However, potential buyers should weigh the pros and cons, particularly regarding maintenance and reliability. Ultimately, if you value a blend of comfort, style, and driving experience, the Audi Q5 I could be a worthy investment. Thank you for watching, and we hope this guide helps you make an informed decision.